The dawn of June 8, 793, arrived as it always did, on the isolated holy island of Lindisfarne. The air was crisp, carrying the briny scent of the North Sea, and the tide had rolled back to reveal the shimmering sands that connected the monastery to the mainland. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the distant crash of waves against the rugged Northumbrian coast. Inside the monastery, monks in coarse wool robes moved silently, tending to their morning prayers. The soft chanting in Latin, the flicker of candlelight against stone walls, the gentle clatter of clay bowls for breakfast, porridge, everything spoke of an unbroken peace that had lasted for generations. But that morning, something was different. Brother Cuthbert, a young novice with eyes the color of rain clouds, was the first to notice. Standing atop the monastery's outer wall, he shaded his eyes against the pale sunrise. At first, the horizon was a Blursian sky, melting into one, but then shapes began to emerge. Long, narrow silhouettes, low in the water, cutting through the waves with unnatural speed. Each had a carved dragon's head at its prow, its wooden jaws bared in a silent snarl. The sight made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "Brother Glyfric," he called down to an older monk passing below. "Do you see them?" Glyfric looked, squinting into the rising light. His weathered face hardened, and his lips moved in a prayer not meant for any service. "Plis ships," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not traders, death." The ships came swiftly, riding the tide as if the sea itself carried them forward. They were unlike the heavy merchant cogs the monks sometimes saw in the distance. These were sleeker, longer, their hulls biting into the water with each pull of the oars. Above them, striped sails swelled in the wind, red and white like fresh blood on snow. The bells of Lindisfarne began to toll, not the measured peal that called the faithful to Mass, but a frantic, uneven clanging that sent the gulls shrieking into the air. Monks abandoned their tasks, some clutching holy relics, others rushing to the church to kneel before the altar. The abbot, a tall man named Higbold, strode into the courtyard, his voice rising over the chaos. "Inside, all of you. Take the sacred Gospels, the silver chalice, leave nothing for them to defile." But there was no time. The first of the dragon-prowed ships ground onto the sand, its hull scraping the shore with a sound that made Brother Cuthbert's teeth ache. Warriors leaped over the sides before the keel had even settled. They moved with terrifying speed. Tall, broad-shouldered men with plaited hair and beards thick as rope, their faces painted in streaks of black and blue. Some wore leather jerkins studded with iron, others simple wool tunics that did nothing to lessen the threat in their eyes. In their hands they carried axes, swords, and spears that gleamed wickedly in the morning light. A guttural roar went up from the shore, the sound of men who had crossed leagues of storm-tossed ocean with one purpose: to kill, to take, to burn. The first clash came at the monastery gate. A pair of lay brothers tried to brace it with the timber, but an axe-head burst through the wood as though it were kindling. The gate splintered inward, and with it came the Vikings. The air filled with the stench of sweat, seawater, and iron as they surged forward. One monk fell to his knees, holding up a crucifix in trembling hands. A Viking's sword came down, shattering the wood and cutting deep into the man's shoulder. He crumpled to the ground, blood soaking the stones. Another warrior kicked open the door to the scriptorium, scattering precious manuscripts across the floor. Gold leaf illuminations, the work of decades, were trampled under muddy boots. Brother Cuthbert found himself frozen near the cloister, watching as the world he knew was torn apart. A Viking with hair the color of pale straw caught sight of him. Their eyes locked for a moment, Cuthbert's wide with terror, the warrior's bright with the thrill of the hunt. The man advanced, swinging a broad axe with casual strength. Cuthbert turned and ran, heart pounding in his throat. He sprinted through the nave of the church, past the altar where the Lindisfarne Gospels lay open. The abbot was there, lifting the sacred book in both arms. "Take it," Higbold commanded, thrusting it toward him. "Run." The weight of the manuscript was shocking, but Cuthbert clutched it to his chest and darted toward the side door. He could hear boots pounding after him, the sharp bark of foreign words urging speed. He flung the door open and stumbled into the cold morning air. Outside, smoke was already curling into the sky. One of the wooden outbuildings had been set alight, flames licking greedily at its thatched roof. Cuthbert ran toward the causeway, praying the tide had not yet closed it off. But as he reached the edge of the sand, a second wave of Vikings was already crossing, cutting off his escape. He hesitated for only a moment, then hid. Throwing himself into a clump of tall seagrass, he crouched low, clutching the Gospels so tightly his fingers ached. From his hiding place, he watched the slaughter unfold. The monks who resisted were cut down. Those who surrendered were bound in ropes, driven toward the ships like cattle. Silver chalices, reliquaries, and cloth of gold altar frontals were stuffed into sacks. The Vikings worked with practiced efficiency, each man knowing exactly what to seize and how to move it. And then came the cries of the dying poet. It was over in less than an hour. The Vikings dragged their captives to the shore, tossing them aboard the ships. The dead were left where they fell, their blood mingling with the seawater in the sand. The monastery, once a beacon of learning and faith, was reduced to smoking ruin. Cuthbert stayed hidden until the last ship pushed off, its dragon head turning back toward the open sea. Even then, he did not move, not until the sails were specks on the horizon and the only sound was the whisper of the tide. When he finally emerged, the wind carried the stench of burned wood and charred flesh. He looked down at the Gospels in his arms, its jeweled cover glinting faintly in the light. The book had survived, but as he stood amid the wreckage of Lindisfarne, he understood a terrible truth. The age of safety was over. The Vikings had come, and they would come again. The fjord lay silent beneath a grey sky, its waters as still as polished steel. The mountains rose on either side like ancient guardians, their peaks shrouded in veils of mist. Only the sound of hammers on oak broke the stillness, a rhythm steady as a heartbeat, echoing off the rock walls and roaring back to the shipyard like the drums of some unseen army. At the water's edge, men swarmed around a vessel still half-berthed from the land. Her ribs of oak curved upward with the grace of a living creature, each plank fastened in the clinker-built style that gave her strength without weight. Tar hissed as it seeped into her seams, the smell thick and sharp in the damp air. A carved dragon's head waited on a trestle nearby, its wooden eyes wide with menace, ready to take its place at the prow. Ragnar Lothbrek stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the ship as though he could already see her gliding across an ocean. The wind pulled at his dark weather-roughened hair, carrying with it the distant scent of snow from the mountains. Behind his eyes burned something colder than the fjord and sharper than the shipwright S-tools. Ambition. "She's nearly ready," said Jarton the shipwright, without pausing in his work. His thick arms moved with the easy strength of a man who had built more ships than he could count. 12 strakes aside, shallow drafted she ride the rivers like a swan, and the sea like a wolf. Ragnar stepped forward, running a palm along the smooth planks. "She will carry 40 shields," he said quietly. "And enough silver to buy 10 more like her." Jarton grunted. "If the gods are willing." "They are," Ragnar replied, though his voice held no hint of prayer, only certainty. The news from Lindisfarne had spread like fire through dry grass. In every hall and market, men whispered of the raid, the gold, the silver, the monks too soft to fight back. Ragnar had listened to these tales in silence, but inside him the stories grew teeth. He could not be content with small plunder, with raiding villages that had little more than their own survival. No, he wanted cities, fortresses, places where kings slept under roofs paid for in coin that could feed whole clans. It was at the Thing, the great gathering of free men, that Ragnar spoke his intent aloud. The assembly field was ringed with tall pines, their trunks black against the morning sky. At the center, the oath ring lay on a stone altar, a band of hammered gold, as thick as a man's wrist. One by one, men stepped forward to press their hands to it, swearing loyalty, vengeance, or the settling of debts. When Ragnar's turn came, he placed his palm on the cold metal, and spoke in a voice that carried to the edges of the crowd. "I swear, by Odin and by the blood of my fathers, to lead this voyage west," he said, "to take from the fat-bellied priests and soft-handed kings what they have hoarded, to return with silver for the living and songs for the dead." A murmur of approval rolled through the assembly. Some men stepped forward immediately, warriors whose names were already half-legioned. The Walker, so large no horse could bear him. Arni the Silent, whose spear struck where his gaze fell. Sigtryggr, who gambled away fortunes and won them back twice over. Others hesitated, glancing to their wives or weighing the danger in their minds. Then Ragnar introduced the strangest of his companions. A monk. He was tall, gaunt, his skin pale from years under cloistered roofs. His head was shaved at the crown, in the fashion of his order, and his rough-spun robe had been traded for the coarse wool of a bondsman. The ropes that had bound him were gone. but the raw marks remained at his wrists. "This is Brother Aldwin," Ragnar announced. "He knows the rivers of the west, and the cities that rise along them. He will guide us where the richest prey sleeps." There was a ripple of unease. A Christian among them, a man of the very God whose houses they would burn. But Ragnar's gaze was unyielding, and one by one the doubters fell silent. A seer stepped forward then, her cloak of raven feathers rustling in the breeze. Her eyes were pale and unseeing, but her voice cut through the crowd like a knife through cloth. "I see a serpent of water, coiled around a crown," she intoned. "I see a man laughing in the pit of snakes, and his sons carrying names of iron, bloodlines of the storm. You already carry them, Ragnar Lothbrok." Her words hung in the air long after she had gone, sinking into the minds of every man present. The weeks that followed were a frenzy of preparation. Women stitched sails of striped wool, dyeing them with blood-red and bone-white patterns that could be seen for miles at sea. Shields were painted and fitted to the ship's gunwales, their round faces like a row of watchful eyes. Weapons were sharpened until they sang when drawn from their sheaths. Brother Aldwin lived apart from the others, under guard, scratching maps into the dirt with a stick. He spoke little, answering questions only when pressed. Yet Ragnar visited him often, standing in the doorway of the small hut that smelled of straw and sea salt. "Tell me about Paris," Ragnar said one evening, as rain hissed on the roof. "It is the heart of the Franks," Aldwin replied. "Built on an island in the Seine, with bridges that choke the river. There are walls of stone, towers with watchfires, and bells to call the city to arms." Ragnar smiled faintly. "We will hear those bells before the Franks see our sails." On the day of the great sacrifice, the clan gathered at the temple. The air was thick with the smell of pine, resin, and blood. A great boar was led forward, its eyes rolling, followed by a white goat, as calm as if it had accepted its fate. The Gogi, the high priest, raised his arms and called upon Odin, Thor, and Freya to bless the voyage. Blood splashed onto the wooden posts, bright against the weathered grain. Ragnar dipped his fingers into the warm crimson and drew a line across his brow, then did the same for Lagertha. "For victory," he said. "For a way home," she replied. When the rites were done, the men feasted on roasted meat and drank mead until their voices shook the rafters. Songs were sung of heroes who had sailed farther than the sun, of warriors whose names would live as long as the stones. At last, the day came. The ship, christened Svolf, slid down greased logs into the water, her dragon's head gleaming in the pale light. The crew leaped aboard, taking their places at the oars. Ragnar stood at the stern, one hand on the steering oar, his eyes fixed on the mouth of the fjord. "Row," he commanded, and the oars bit into the water as one. The Svolf surged forward, cutting through the fjord like a predator set free. Along the shore, women and children ran to keep pace, waving and calling out blessings. The mountains fell away behind them, and the open sea spread before them, grey, restless, and endless. The wind filled the sail, snapping it taut, and the dragon's head seemed to lift in anticipation. Brother Aldwin clutched the leather-wrapped bundle of his holy book, glancing once toward the horizon where his homeland lay. He could not decide whether to pray for the Franks or for himself. The voyage had begun. The river smelled different from the open sea, heavy with earth, moss, and the faint tang of smoke from distant hearths. The Svolf glided over its dark surface, like a predator slipping into another creature's domain. On either side, the land flattened into green meadows and cultivated fields, stitched together by hedgerows and dotted with villages whose people stopped their work to stare. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Dogs barked along the banks, pacing the ship's progress until their courage failed, and they fell back. A few men lingered, gripping hoes or axes, their faces pale as they recognized the dragon head on the prow. One called something in a tongue Brother Aldwin understood, but the crew did not. A word, half warning, half curse. "They know," Aldwin muttered, keeping his voice low. Ragnar stood at the steering oar, eyes narrowed against the morning glare on the water. "Good," he said. "Let them ring their bells early. Fear works best when it has time to ripen." The watchtowers. By mid-morning, the first of the Frankish watchtowers came into view, a squat cylinder of grey stone, its narrow windows staring like suspicious eyes. At the top, a small brazier burned, its smoke curling lazily into the sky. As Svolf drew closer, the brazier flared. A figure moved at the parapet, striking flint against steel, until the flame leapt higher. Ragnar's lips curled. "They're passing the word," Aldwin said, more to himself than anyone, "from tower to tower, until it reaches the city." "And when it does?" Lagertha asked. Aldwin hesitated. "Paris will be ready," laughed, a booming sound that rolled across the water. "Let them be ready. Meat tastes better when it fights back." The river narrows the Seine wound like a serpent through the land, sometimes curling back on itself so sharply that the sea-wolf seemed to chase her own tail. At each bend, the banks rose steeper, forcing the oarsmen to dig harder against the current. The wind shifted fitfully, sometimes filling the sail, sometimes dying entirely. Ragnar adjusted their course with small, deft movements of the steering oar. His eyes flicked constantly between the river ahead and the shore, measuring distance, searching for ambush, counting the heartbeats between each warning bell. Once, near a narrow channel where the water swirled treacherously, they passed a riverside chapel. A single monk stood in the doorway, ringing a handbell with frantic speed. Aldwin stared at him until the figure was swallowed by distance, his own hands tightening on the leather-wrapped book in his lap. "You can still leave," Ragnar said quietly, without looking at him. "And go where?" Aldwin asked. "The Franks will think me a traitor. Your people see me as a prisoner." "No, my only choice is to keep guiding you." Ragnar's smile was as thin as a blade. "Then guide us." "Well, monk, we are almost there." The first glimpse of Paris. It was just past midday when the river curved once more and the city appeared, rising from its island like a jewel set in a silver chain. Stone walls encircled it, their grey bulk broken by towers and gates. Bridges stretched from the island to the riverbanks, guarded at both ends by fortified gatehouses. The air above shimmered with the heat of countless hearths, and from within came the faint, discordant chorus of bells ringing all at once. "There," Aldwin said, pointing. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the dread in him. "That is Paris." Ragnar studied the walls, the gates, the movement of men along the battlements. His mind was already breaking the city into parts, weak points to exploit, patterns to disrupt. "How many men guard it?" Lagertha asked. "Hundreds," Aldwin said. "Perhaps more." "And the bridges? They can be raised to block the river entirely." "Then we will take them before they are raised," Ragnar said simply. The approach the crew readied themselves in silence. Shields were lifted into place along the gunwales, their painted faces glaring at the city. Spears and axes were laid within easy reach. The Sevolf's dragonhead caught the light, her glass eyes blazing as though sensing the battle ahead. Ragnar raised his voice just enough for the men to hear over the river's murmur. "Remember Lindisfarne," he said. "Remember how their priests wept, how their gold shone in our hands. Paris will weep the same way. Their walls are high, but their hearts are soft." A low growl of agreement rolled through the crew. As they closed the distance, the watchmen on the bridge towers began shouting, their words lost in the wind, but their meaning clear. Horns blew. The bells grew louder, their clangor carrying across the water like the heartbeat of the city. The first clash, a volley of arrows hissed from the nearest tower, splashing into the river around the Sea-Wolf. One shaft thudded into a shield, quivering. The oarsmen didn't falter. Shields high, Lagertha barked, and the crew obeyed, angling the wooden discs to catch the next flight. Crouched by the mast, an axe in each hand, his grin wide and wolfish. "Close enough now," he muttered. The river narrowed between the bridge supports. The gatehouse loomed above, its portcullis still open. Ragnar steered the Sea-Wolf straight for it. "Row," he roared. The oars bit deep, the ship lunging forward like a beast unleashed. Arrows clattered harmlessly off raised shields. In moments they were under the shadow of the gatehouse, the sound of the bells deafening overhead. The breech begin's grappling hooks flew upward, catching on the stone parapets. Warriors swarmed up the ropes, their boots scraping against the walls, their breaths loud in the narrow space. The defenders fought back with spears and rocks, but the Vikings were relentless. Lagertha was among the first over the top. Her shield caught a sword blow, her axe answered in kind, and a Frankish guard crumpled. More of the crew followed, spilling onto the walkway like a tide of steel and fury. Below, Ragnar held the Sea-Wolf steady in the current, his eyes fixed on the chaos above. He could already see the pattern shifting, defenders abandoning their posts at the far bridge, in panic, the open path to the heart of the city. "Take the bridge," he called up to Lagertha, "and hold it until the tide turns in our favor." The bells of Paris, the bells rang on, their voices colliding in the air, warning every street and alley of the storm now at their gates. But no matter how loud they rang, the sound could not mask the clash of steel, the cries of the dying, or the roar of the Seawolf's crew as they drove deeper into the city's defenses. From his place at the steering oar, Ragnar looked up at the nearest bell tower. For an instant, the sunlight caught on the bronze bell within, and he imagined it as nothing more than another treasure waiting to be claimed. He smiled, the same way he had at Lindisfarne. The storm had reached Paris. The bridge trembled under the weight of war. Every footstep, every clash of steel sent a dull vibration through the ancient timbers, mixing with the muffled roar of the Seine below. The wind that swept along the river carried the stench of burning pitch, the metallic tang of blood, and the sharp, bitter smoke of the defenders' firepot. Lagertha planted her boots on the slick wood, parrying a sword blow with the rim of her shield. Sparks spat as her axe came down, splitting the Frankish guard's helmet like a clay jar. She kicked the body aside and surged forward. The shouts of her warriors close behind pushed them back. She roared, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This bridge belongs to us now." The choke point. The gatehouse tower rose on the far bank, its stone walls sweating from the damp river air. The defenders were dug in here, archers firing from narrow slits, spearmen braced against the charge. But the Vikings fought like a flood trying to smash a dam, relentless, hungry, unafraid of breaking themselves, if it meant the walls would fall. Above, the bells continued their mad chorus, hammering the air with panic. Each clang seemed to fuel the frenzy below. Ragnar, still aboard the Seawolf, felt the rhythm in his bones. He steered the ship just close enough for his archers to add their arrows to the storm. Each shaft a whispering promise of death that found gaps in armor and bare throats. "Lagertha," he called up from the deck, "hold that bridge. The city's throat is under your heel." Blood in the water. The defenders tried to break the Vikings' momentum with boiling oil, but the wind betrayed them. Smoke and steam curling back into their own faces. Arrows hissed from both sides, some finding shields, others sinking deep into flesh. The river beneath glittered red where bodies had fallen. The walker was a force of nature on the planks, his two axes rising and falling in a rhythm older than the city itself. One Frankish knight lunged at him, sword aimed for his gut, but caught the blade between the hafts of his axes, twisted, and sent the man tumbling over the railing into the churning water below. Arni, the Silent, fought beside him, his spear a living thing, darting and striking with unerring precision. His face betrayed nothing, not triumph, not rage, only the cold efficiency of a man who had decided long ago that battle was simply another kind of craft. Inside the gatehouse, Lagertha knew the bridge alone would not win them the day. She signaled to two of her swiftest warriors, who broke off from the melee and followed her toward the gatehouse door. A heavy iron latch barred it from within. Without hesitation, she hefted a captured spear and jammed it through the narrow gap between door and frame. With a sharp wrench, the latch gave way. They burst inside. The air in the gatehouse was close and rank, lit only by the flickering light from arrow slits. Two Frankish soldiers turned too late. Lagertha's axe caught one across the chest. The other fell to a spear thrust. Stairs spiraled upward, their stone steps slick with damp. Lagertha took them two at a time, her breath even despite the weight of her armor. At the top, she found the winch that controlled the bridge's heavy chain gate. Two more guards barred the way, but her warriors cut them down before they could cry out. "Drop it," she ordered. The chain clattered as the gate fell, sealing the river passage to any reinforcements from a river. The Seawolf now had a secure foothold in the heart of Paris. Ragnar's push below. Ragnar saw the gate fall and knew the moment had come. "Row us in," he commanded. The oars bit deep, the Seawolf gliding under the shadow of the captured gatehouse. Warriors leaped from the deck onto the bridge, swelling Lagertha's line until the defenders buckled under the pressure. Brother Aldwyn stood on the deck, clutching the rail, watching the city draw closer. "You'll burn it," he said quietly, half to himself. Ragnar glanced at him. "I'll take what I came for. If fire is the price, so be it." The turning of the tide. The Frankish commander, a tall knight with a red-plumed helmet, appeared at the far end of the bridge, rallying his men. His voice carried even over the din. Shields locked, spears lowered, they advanced in disciplined ranks. "Form the wall," Lagertha ordered. The Vikings braced, shields overlapping, axes and swords ready. The impact when the two lines met was like the crack of a felled tree. Men shoved, cursed, stabbed in the narrow space, the bridge swaying under the struggle. The Frankish line began to give, but slowly, like ice breaking under steady pressure, roared and drove forward, shattering the shield before him with a single blow. Arni's spear found the gap left open, and another defender fell screaming into the river. The city opens. Finally, the Frankish line broke. The defenders turned and ran toward the inner gate, some casting their weapons aside in panic. The Vikings surged after them, spilling from the bridge into the streets beyond. Paris unfolded in front of them. Narrow, cobbled lanes, timbered houses, market stalls abandoned in the rush to flee. Smoke from hastily doused hearths hung low, mingling with the acrid tang of fear. Ragnar stepped onto the bridge at last, crossing into the city he had dreamed of. The bells still rang, but now they sounded less like a warning and more like a lament. "Spread out," he ordered. "Shut the gates. Hold the bridges. Let no one in or out unless I command it." His eyes scanned the rooftops, the towers, the clusters of buildings beyond. Somewhere in this city lay the wealth he had come for, and perhaps the fight that would make his name eternal. A city on the brink by nightfall. The Vikings held both bridges and the main gatehouse. Fires burned in the distance where small skirmishes flared. The streets echoed with the cries of those still trying to escape, and the clatter of hooves as messengers raced to rally the city's defenders. Ragnar stood in the square, the glow of torchlight flickering over his face. "This is only the beginning," he told his warriors. "We hold their lifeline now. Tomorrow, we take their heart." And in the shadows Brother Aldwin watched, torn between the city of his birth and the ship that had carried him here, knowing that when the heart of Paris stopped beating, the river would carry its blood to every corner of the Frankish realm. The dawn that bled into Paris felt colder than it should have been. Not the crisp cold of a clear winter, but the damp chill that clings to the bones, the kind that makes men draw their cloaks tighter and pray without knowing they are praying. The city was silent except for the bells. They had rung without mercy through the night, a desperate heartbeat that refused to falter, even now, in the pale light of morning. The bridge the Vikings had taken was slick with dew and blood. Dark streaks dried into the wood, turned black in the shadows and glistening red where the moisture revived them. Beneath the massive arch of the gatehouse, the Sivolf lay as still as a stalking beast, her sail furled, her dragon's head glaring upriver toward the threat that would come. The eyes of glass caught the dawn just enough to flash like something alive. Ragnar stood at the stern, hands loosely gripping the steering oar, though the ship did not move. His gaze drifted constantly, from the far shore, to the rooftops beyond the bridge, to the sluggish flow of the Seine. He was a man used to reading a battlefield before it took shape, and he could feel this one gathering. Around him, his crew moved in a subdued rhythm, the rasp of whetstone on blade, the quiet murmur of leather straps being pulled tight, the faint creak of shields being adjusted along the rails. Lagertha moved along the bridge, checking every knot in the mooring lines, every board in the walkway, her eyes searching for signs of tampering. The walker sat with his back to a pier, both axes resting across his knees, eyes half closed in the deceptive stillness of a predator conserving strength. Arni the silent counted arrows with a craftsman's precision. Brother Aldwin knelt near the gangplank, tracing a cross on the deck before wiping it away. The gathering on the east span, Lagertha's voice was low but sharp. "East span." Ragnar followed her gaze. Shapes were gathering at the far end of the bridge, an uneven line of armed townsfolk, a handful of knights in polished mail, and a priest with a cross held high. Their commander, a knight with a red-plumed helm, paced before them, gesturing sharply to keep the line tight. Ragnar watched their formation bend awkwardly around a side street, a hinge that could break if struck hard enough. "Hold the center," he told Lagertha. "Make them bleed for every plank. I'll crack the hinge." The barrel of iron seeds with 20 men. Ragnar slipped into the maze of alleys. The streets were narrow as throats, lined with shuttered windows. Laundry lines sagged overhead. The smell of stale bread and river damp clung to the air. They stopped at a corner just off the bridge, where a barrel waited, filled with bent nails, broken spear points, and twisted iron, each one sharpened to maim. On the bridge, the Franks advanced. Boots thudded against planks, shields raised. The Vikings met them with a silent wall of round shields, unflinching. Ragnar gave a single nod. The barrel tipped, spilling its vicious harvest across the walkway. The first rank of Franks found them with their feet, screams tearing the air as boots slid and blood wet the wood. Was up in an instant, axes moving in a brutal, steady rhythm. Shields splintered, helms split. Arni's spear slid into the gaps with cold precision. Forward to lock shields, Lagertha barked. The Vikings pressed, driving the enemy back toward the gatehouse. The flank. While the enemy reeled, Ragnar's detachment burst from the side lane, striking the hinge point with the force of a battering ram. The Frankish line buckled instantly. Panic spread faster than orders, and the retreat became a rout. "Hold," Ragnar commanded, before they could chase. "The bridge is ours. The gates are ours. Let fear grow." "Fire on the water," Aldwine's sharp voice drew Ragnar's attention upriver. Fire on the water. Dark shapes drifted toward them. Barges lashed in pairs, piled high with brush and pine, their decks slick with pitch. On the banks, men ran alongside, guiding them with long poles. "They mean to burn us out," Aldwin said. "Cut the lashings, soak the hides." Ragnar's orders rang across the bridge. Wet animal hides were hauled up over the ship's flanks. Arni's spears found torchbearers, knocking them into their own flames. But the first barge struck a pier, fire roaring upward, heat washing over the bridge, and two others dropped flat, reaching between planks to saw through ropes. Ropes tied in the night to trap the Seawolf in place. "Flood the chain locker," Aldwin shouted. "Shift her weight." Water rushed into the ballast, swinging the ship just far enough for the burning raft to scrape past instead of embracing her. Lagertha hauled on a line until the ship slid another precious foot away from the heat. 10 heartbeats later, the danger passed. Ragnar gave Aldwin a nod. "You saved my ship." "I saved the river from becoming a grave," the monk said. "Same thing today," Ragnar replied. Sabotage later, Lagertha found 3 more hidden lashings under the bridge. "They had help inside the city," she said. "Then we hunt the traitor," Ragnar told her. "Double the watches." The mangonel. By midday, the Franks brought up a mangonel. Clay jars arced through the sky, shattering on the bridge in splashes of pitch, quicklime, and oil. Fumes clawed at lungs. Lime blistered skin even without flame. "Cover up," Lagertha shouted. 2 men went blind instantly. Arni cut open their swollen eyelids to wash the lime away. Ragnar led a strike force through the alleys, climbing to the tower that housed the weapon. They hit fast and hard, cutting down the crew and shoving the mangonel over the parapet into the riverbank below. The grain stores that afternoon, Ragnar found the granaries. Stone walls, guarded gates. Aldwin pointed out a blocked cart entrance. A few coded knocks brought a voice from within. Ragnar's sword did the rest. Inside, the guards were cut down quickly. "Take most of it," Ragnar ordered. "Leave them enough to hope. Hope binds tighter than fear." The fever. That night, the wind shifted, carrying damp air into the Viking camp. Coughs broke the silence. 2 men lay feverish before midnight, their skin blotched red-purple. "Separate them," Lagertha ordered. "Burn what they've touched." Aldwin tended the sick, murmuring quiet prayers. Ragnar watched from a distance, already counting the shields he might lose. The envoy at dawn, a delegation under a white flag, approached. 2 priests and a soldier. "The king is coming," Aldwin translated. "Good," Ragnar said. "Then God will see a fine fight." They asked his price. Ragnar named it. Silver, grain, salted meat, and 2 cannons as hostages. "Before sunset, or the price doubles." Hooks in the water as they withdrew. Arni spotted movement upriver. More rafts. Undersides hung with hooked iron nets meant to tear a ship apart. Beyond them, the dust of an approaching army rose on the far bank. The king's banners appeared. Ragnar's smile was all edge. "Let him come to his bridges and his bells, and find me keeping both." The Seawolf shuddered as the first net scraped her hull. "Axes," Lagertha roared. "Cut those nets." From across the water, the king's army roared his name. Ragnar laughed once. "Short, sharp, dangerous. You rang for a storm," he said. "Now stand in it." The first hooked raft struck the Seawolf with a sound like claws scraping bone. Barbed iron scraped along her hull, seeking to bite. Men leaned out over the side, hacking at the lashings with short-hafted axes. Each blow jarred the arms. Each cut sent a shudder through the raft until the ropes parted and the river pulled it away to smash against a pier. "Cut low below the knot," Lagertha shouted from the deck, braced against the current. Her axe bit through a final rope, and the twisted net slid away into the Seine's grey water. The king on the far bank on the opposite shore, the royal host assembled in deliberate order. Banners of deep blue, lilies embroidered in gold, rippled in the wind. Cavalry stood in precise lines, lances upright armor, catching the cold light of morning. At their center, King Charles sat mounted, a broad figure beneath a wine-red cloak and gilded helm. Ragnar stood on the high spine of the bridge, eyes moving constantly, counting banners, marking the distance between messengers, noting the pace of orders. This was no reckless rush. The king meant to grind him down. 500, Lagertha murmured, joining him. Closer to 6, Ragnar replied. But less than 100 will matter in the first clash. The fever among the ranks behind them, coughing, broke the morning calm. A second joined it, then a third. Brother Aldwin moved quickly between the sick, his face grim. Ulf, young, broad-shouldered, still with a boy's grin the day before, lay shivering under 2 cloaks. Red-purple blotches marred his skin. Another warrior coughed until blood flecked his lips. This fever leaps in the breath, Aldwin told Ragnar. It's fast. By sunset, more will fall. How many shields gone already? 3 too weak to stand. More, by nightfall. Ragnar's jaw tightened. Separate them. Burn what they've touched. If they die, burn them too. Aldwin gave a slow nod. There was no room for sentiment. Parley, the bells of Paris changed their tune. Too long, too short. Parley, a skiff pushed off from the far bank, carrying a richly robed chamberlain, a knight in polished mail, and a white flag. I am Gerard, the chamberlain announced when Aldwin translated. His Majesty offers terms for your safe withdrawal. Safe for whom? Ragnar asked. Name your price. Ragnar spread his hands. Silver, to fill my ship's belly. Grain for my men. Salted meat for a month at sea. And 2 cannons from your great church to sail with me for 3 days. So your king remembers his word. The knight bristled. You will not take holy men. I will protect them, Ragnar said, from your king's lapses in memory. Gerard hesitated, glanced back. Charles gave a short nod. Before sunset, he said. Before sunset, Ragnar corrected. If the sun crowns your king before we finish, the price doubles. The first test, the skiff had barely touched shore before the cavalry wedge began to move. It came slow, probing, shields tight. Arnie's dozen archers rose on the parapet. 3 horses fell in the first volley. Still the wedge pressed forward until it reached the bridge's sagged section. Waiting there, dropped the iron-shod beam, the bridge breaker onto its bracing. The planks dipped, lances wavered, shields bit into hands, and Arnie's second volley struck. The retreat horn sounded from the far bank. The wedge withdrew, leaving men and horses sprawled on the boards. Fire and water by midday. The king's engineers had woven the hooked rafts into a hedge around the piers. Ragnar answered with fire. Small bundles of brush and pitch, lit and loosed upstream, drifted down on the turning tide. Flames raced through the old lashings. The hedge came apart in smoking chunks. Let the river remember us kindly, Ragnar said. The grain and the chain in the early afternoon. Ox-drawn wagons rolled onto the bridge. Sacks of wheat and barrels of barley sealed with the bishop's ring. Gerard oversaw the delivery, his face set like stone. Grain first, Ragnar ordered. Silver after. Chains of men passed the goods to the Wolf. Lagertha checked each seal, guarded the wagon's return. Arnie watched the rooftops for danger. On the third wagon, a boy bolted. Lagertha caught him by the collar. In his hand, a sealed message marked with the River Guild's emblem. Aldwin read aloud. Chain across the narrow above St. Lupus, lower at moonrise. Boom, chain, he said. They'll trap you. Not if it sleeps on the riverbed, Ragnar replied. That night, 4 swimmers cut it free in the dark. Silver and hostages near sunset. The silver came. Each chest took 4 men to carry. Ragnar weighed them on the Savolf's beam scale. Aldwin called the count. The Jarl's men repeated it. Hostages, Ragnar demanded. 2 cannons were brought forward, pale but steady. They were given bread, water, and guarded seats. You will be safe, Ragnar told them, unless your king forgets how to count. The king's treachery as the last chest was stowed. The far horn sounded. Attack. The cavalry wedge returned. Deeper, faster. Arnie's archers dropped horses in the lead ranks, waited for them to hit the sag, then dropped the bridge breaker again. The front buckled. The rear crashed into it. Chaos, steel and men tangled, and the wedge fell back, bloodied. Nightfall. Ulf died before the fire burned low. Lagertha lit his pyre. Ragnar watched in silence. Near midnight, Arnie touched his shoulder and pointed upstream. Torches moved in a straight line across the water. The king's engineers, stitching a pontoon bridge. If the river won't give him a road, Ragnar said, he'll sew one. Burn it now, Lagertha asked. Not yet. We burn it when pride walks across it. Night draped itself over Paris like a damp cloak. Upstream, a chain of lanterns marked the king's newest ambition, a pontoon bridge stitched together from boats and thick planks, each lashing tested by hand. The engineers worked with slow precision, their voices low, their movements deliberate under the eyes of their sovereign. From the crown of the captured bridge, Ragnar watched. He read the shape of the work, the spacing between boats, the tension in the ropes, the way the current leaned against the pontoons. It was built to carry more than men. It could bear cavalry, even siege engines, and if it reached the far bank hole, Charles could strike without ever touching Ragnar's choke point. On the far shore, the king sat his destrier in a pool of torchlight, a fixed figure in gold and crimson. He did not look toward the Sea-Wolf. He did not need to. His stillness alone promised the bridge would be finished. Plans in the dark, Lagertha joined Ragnar, her eyes following the faint glow upriver. By dawn, they'll be ready to cross. By dawn, Ragnar agreed, and by midday, pride will ride with them. Pride burns best when it's carrying its own weight. Behind them, leaned on the bridge breaker with an eager grin. We let them step on it, then we take it from under them. Brother Aldwine's voice cut in from the shadows. The fever worsens. 6 can't stand. More will fall by tomorrow. Ragnar's gaze didn't leave the lantern-lit line. We leave at the ebb, but before that, we make the king remember what it costs to reach for what's mine. Foxes on a leash for light skiffs were brought from the quays. Inside, they were coated with tar and packed with dry brush and pine. Pitch jars, wrapped in wet cloth, lay along the keels. Each skiff's bow rope ran through a pulley on the Sea-Wolf's side, back to a cleat on deck. Fire on a leash, Lagertha said, testing a knot. Teeth on a leash, Ragnar corrected. Arni chose 12 archers and a boy to run arrows along the line. Keep low, he told the boy. If you drop something, make sure it's not yourself. The bell's warning dawn came pale and sharp. The bells of Paris began their morning. Then Notre Dame's great voice boomed once, paused, then again. From the south, smaller bells answered in a quick, urgent rhythm. Water stares at the island, Aldwin said. They'll send boats for our stern. They can try, Lagertha said, already moving. The first strike, Ragnar raised 2 fingers. The first skiff slid into the water. A torch touched its belly, and flames ran up the brush. Rope hissed through the pulleys as it drifted toward the pontoons. Beneath the bridge, the skiff lodged against a mooring rope. Fire bit deep. Smoke curled between the planks above. Shouts rose. Men ran for buckets, only to be dropped by Arni's archers before they reached the edge. The cavalry wedge. A horn blared from the far bank. The cavalry wedge began to advance over the captured bridge. Lances upright, shields locked, crouched over the sagged section. Bridge breaker, ready. Ragnar let them come. The planks dipped under their weight. Now, he said. The beam dropped. The sag deepened. Riders pitched forward. Lances wavered. Arni's second volley struck. Horses screamed and stumbled. The wedge broke its rhythm. Southgate boats from the island's south gate. A dozen militia boats launched, oars churning toward the Sea-Wolf. Aft, Lagertha's voice cut the air. Hooks and axes. Take the oars. A grapnel caught an oar. An axe severed it. A second boat spun into its neighbor. Men shouting as they clashed. Aldwin shoved another away with a boathook, yelling, "Spare them if you can." But battle rarely listened. Breaking the spine, the second skiff was sent in. Its fire licked along the pontoons, finding rope and pine. A plank sagged, then split. The third skiff followed, biting into the middle section until gaps yawned between boats. Fourth, Ragnar ordered. The final skiff slid into place. Flames raced along the lashings. One pontoon yawned away from the next. The bridge bowed, broke, and spilled men into the river. Armor dragged them under before their cries could carry. From the far bank, the retreat horn sounded. Long, bitter. The turn the river's pull shifted. The ebb tide had come. Slip her, Ragnar said. Knives cut the moorings. The Sea-Wolf drifted, then caught the current. A militia boat's grapnel bit her quarter. Lagertha's axe cut it loose. Arni's archers disabled 2 oars, and the craft spun away. St. Lupus, the Narrows, came into view. Where the boom chain had been, there was only open water. The Sea-Wolf slid through. On a balcony, a woman held a child and watched in silence. A long arrow struck the stone post, pulled it free, and tossed it into the river with a snort. Departure. Ragnar turned to the two cannons. Your king's silver bought you safe passage, and him a lesson. Lagertha cut their bonds. They were lowered into a skiff. Aldwyn touched their brows. Remember mercy when you count the dead. Toward the sea, the city thinned 2 fields. Smoke gave way to the smell of grass. Gulls circled ahead, their cries sharp over the wind. Half sail, Ragnar called. Canvas climbed, filled, and the sea-wolf leaned into her stride. Aldwyn came to the stern. You could have stayed to break them again. I broke enough, Ragnar said. The rest belongs to the river. Behind them, Paris bells rang. Not for victory, not for defeat, but for endurance. Ahead, the river's mouth opened toward the horizon, heavy with salt air and new wars. Count the chests, Ragnar said. Then count the men. We measure by the smaller number. By the living, Lagertha answered. By the living, Ragnar agreed. The sea-wolf slipped past the last tower, leaving behind smoke, steel, and a shattered bridge of iron and bone.